If you're worried about AI being built behind closed doors by a handful of people who don't share their values, you're not alone. If you're a founder or a leader trying to navigate the AI hype while keeping your business ethical and profitable, this conversation is for you. You'll learn why the future of AI isn't about rigid rules, but about democratic systems that actually listen to the people that they serve. Welcome back to the Champion Mindset Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Dahya. We often talk about resilience, growth, and personal sense. But today we're looking at the future on how we can work and think alongside technology. I want to bring someone who sees a bigger picture of where AI is heading, not from the coding perspective, but a deeply human one. I'm joined by Dr. Craig Kaplan to talk about how we align these powerful tools with real human values. Dr. Craig Kaplan is the CEO and founder of IQ Company and superintelligence.com. He has earned his PhD in cognitive psychology from Carnegie Mellon University, where he conducted research with Nobel laureate Herbert A. Simon. Craig has spent a career at the intersection of AI, collective intelligence, and large-scale systems. This includes founding Predict Wall Street, a financial firm that applied collective intelligence to markets and powered a top-performing market-neutral hedge fund. Today, Craig works and focuses on building safer, faster, and more profitable AI systems through a collective intelligence approach. He integrates human and AI agents to achieve aligned, scalable intelligence. Craig is the author of a 10-paper series on superintelligence architecture, and he is the leading advocate for democratic, human-driven value alignment as a path to safe AGI. Craig, it's a pleasure to have you on the Champion Mindset Collective. Welcome.
Anthony, it's terrific to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're most welcome. Craig, I'd love for you to share your journey in life from childhood to now. How did you get here?
Well, I think I became interested in psychology and the human mind really my freshman year in college. So I guess I was 18 years old, and I took a class in psychobiology, which was really fun. You learned about illusions and how the mind works and perception. And I just thought it was the best thing ever. And that started me on a journey that then led me, as you mentioned in the intro, to Carnegie Mellon, where I had an opportunity to work with Herbert Simon, but also a few of the other really great minds at the time who were pioneering both artificial intelligence as well as a brand new field called cognitive science, really the science of how thinking systems work. And it's just been a blast, and I've never looked back. It got me off to a great start, and then in my career, I continued along those lines.
Yeah, it would have been an interesting place to be in, learning all of that. And looking back, I guess there'll be a lot of memories that will come up with what you're doing today as well. So you've spent decades studying cognitive psychology and AI long before it was even massive trend where it is today. I'm curious to know where your fascination with the human mind and machines actually began.
To me, there's nothing more interesting than how thinking systems work. And Herb Simon was one of the pioneers in this area. So in 1956, the field of artificial intelligence was named. There was a conference at Dartmouth. So this was before I was born. Hopefully, people realize I'm not quite that old. But at a conference in Dartmouth, there were 11 scientists that got together, and they were arguing back and forth, and they decided, hey, we're going to name this new field, and they called it artificial intelligence. But at that conference, there was only one group of scientists that actually presented a working artificial intelligence program, and that was Herbert Simon, Alan Newell, and Cliff Shaw. Two of those scientists were at Carnegie Mellon. Alan Newell and Herbert Simon were both there, and so they were kind of the leaders in this brand new field. And that's what attracted me to go study with them. And I had the chance to study with both of them, actually, although Herb was my mentor and he was my thesis advisor. And we just had a great time working together. So that was the beginning of the interest. But what else could be more fascinating than studying sort of thinking systems? That's kind of how I approached it. And in terms of AI, Demis Hassabis, who is the head of Google DeepMind, has said it very well. If you want to pick a tough problem to solve, what problem can you solve that solves all the other problems? Well, that's artificial intelligence. If you can figure out how to make an intelligent system that's as smart or perhaps even smarter than humans, then you've created something that can go out and solve all the other problems that we have. And so that also was attractive to me, I think.
Yeah. And how old were you when you went into that space?
So I was 21 years old when I started graduate school. I got my PhD at 25. I sort of zipped through the program. It was a wonderful experience because a lot of it had to do with the time. At that time, AI had been around, as I mentioned, since 56, but the type of AI that dominated was something called symbolic AI, basically teaching artificial intelligence by programming rules into the computer. But in the early 1980s, there was this new approach that was kind of rising up, which was called machine learning and neural networks. And the idea was, wow, instead of having to program everything into the computer to get intelligence, what if the computer could just learn on its own? We just feed data into it, and then it teaches itself how to be intelligent. And of course, that is now the dominant paradigm for AI. But at the time, it was a brand new idea. And some of the pioneers, Jay McClelland, I was in his research group as well, was at Carnegie Mellon. So you had these two different camps, the symbolic guys, which really was Herb Simon and Alan Newell. They were, very representative of the symbolic approach. But you also had the new connectionist approach or neural network approach or machine learning approach that was kind of on the rise. And so there were fascinating discussions and arguments back and forth. And I got to be right there, kind of like Forrest Gump in the middle of it while all this was happening. And I learned a lot that way.
Yeah. You're the second person that I've had conversation with that has been in the space. So a few episodes ago, I interviewed Arshaville Blackwell, and he was at the cutting edge of neural networks and so on as well, with two Nobel Prize winners as well. I forget the names. But hearing your side and his side, it's really cool.
Such a fascinating topic. And that was a great time. I don't know if he was studying in the 80s, but that was when a lot of the pioneering work was done. Jeff Hinton, who many people think of as the godfather of AI, he's actually maybe more like the godfather of machine learning and the neural network approach. But he was a colleague of Jay McClellan's. And Jay is still going. He's at Stanford University. I've met him recently, and he's now at the stage of his career where he's just everybody is honoring him. And it must be wonderful to be those folks that sort of pioneered the approach and to watch how it sort of blossomed.
Yeah, and what we're seeing now is built on all that foundational work that all those amazing people did back then.
Yes.
What was the first thing that you saw that made you realize AI wouldn't just be a bit of code, but about human psychology?
Well, the thing that impressed me about AI right from the beginning, and many people are not aware of this because there's still debates that rage today about, well, will AI really be creative? Can it be creative? Or are humans somehow special? And only human beings can be creative thinkers. AI is just a tool. It can, be very efficient at processing information. But I sort of early on saw something that sort of changed my mind on that. And that was, as I mentioned in 1956, there was one program that was presented by Herb Simon and Alan Newell and Cliff Shaw that was called the Logic Theorist. And this was an AI program. And even though it was not based on machine learning, it had the rules, the basic rules programmed into it. It actually discovered something new. And so in the US, the patent office has a test for whether something is creative. They say if it's novel and if it's useful. It has to be new and it has to be useful. And if so, those are the key criteria for granting a patent.
Mm,
Well, this program, this computer program, was supposed to just kind of come up with proofs from a mathematical textbook. And mostly that's what it did. But it also came up with a brand new proof that was not in the textbook on its own, just by exploring the space. And it said, oh, well, here's a proof. And it turns out that that proof had never come up before. And Herb Simon actually took the proof and he mailed it to Bertrand Russell, who was one of the authors of the textbook, and said, hey, here's this proof that the AI came up with. And Bertrand Russell said, wow, we hadn't thought of this one. It's a really good proof. We wish we had thought of it. So right there in 1956, you had something that was novel and useful. And so it was creative. And so realizing that computer programs could be creative just as people are creative really was sort of a light bulb moment for me. And that
mm,
happened right at the beginning of the field. I'd only encountered it sort of, I guess, in 1984, 85 when I started graduate school.
yeah. I've got a question around these amazing people that basically started all of this, and you got the people doing the neural network stuff. And did they ever like all come together and collaborate and work together towards, or were they working in their own sort of space?
There was a lot of collaboration. So at Carnegie Mellon University, which was in Pittsburgh, you had Jay McClelland, and Jeff Hinton actually was visiting there as well. He later went to University of Toronto in Canada, but for a while he spent some time at Carnegie Mellon as well. And they were both working with David Rumelhart, who was another real genius in this area of neural networks over at Stanford. Unfortunately, Rumelhart died young. Otherwise, I'm sure he would have been one of the names that everybody mentions today. So there was collaboration there on the neural network front. And in the symbolic AI camp, you had Herb Simon, you had Alan Newell at Carnegie Mellon, you had folks like Marvin Minsky over at MIT, John McCarthy. So there were a lot of people working on AI at different universities, primarily because it was a brand new kind of field, and a lot of collaboration going on. And there was also some competition and heated arguments between the various camps. You would have these symposiums, and I remember Herb pounding the table and saying, this is not understandable. This isn't real science or whatever. And the other side, yes, but intelligence will emerge. And that was a real open question in the 80s because the computers were not powerful enough to really see that AI could do much that was useful. I had an office mate who was doing the neural network approach, and he spent, his entire 4 years or 4 years plus of his PhD trying to get it to recognize the letter A. That's all it could do, is recognize the letter A in different orientations. And that strained the limits of the computers of the day. I mean, we had very powerful computers, and that's barely what they were able to do. So it took a while for the neural network approach that now is so successful and powering GPT and, OpenAI's products and Google's products and Anthropic's products. All of them are built on that fundamental work that was done by McClelland and by Jeff Hinton and by those colleagues who were working on the connectionist or neural network approach. It's just back in the 80s, the computers weren't powerful enough for us to really be able to tackle the kinds of problems that they can do easily today.
Yeah, there would have been the camp of all these people that are excited and going on this journey with AI. Were they the naysayers as well? And what was going on in the camp where people didn't believe in this or they were scared of this? Is it like what it is now, where certain people are still overwhelmed and scared? Like, what was it like back then?
I don't think people were very scared in the 80s. There were lots of naysayers. There were philosophers, John Searle and Daniel Dennett, and different folks who would argue, look, this is never going to be more than a toy. It's not going to amount to a hill of beans. It's not real intelligence, these kinds of arguments. And they would hold out all the things that humans could do that the computer could never do. And what happened was, one by one, these tasks that were supposedly unique to humans, like playing chess or doing abstract reasoning or things that humans using language, using tools, one by one, each of these things has kind of fallen by the wayside, and AI is able to do all of them, all of those things anyway, better than humans. I think in the early days, the arguments were really about whether this is a real science and whether it's going to amount to anything. I think it's a more recent phenomenon that people have begun to really become afraid or worried about, wow, they all see that it is powerful and that it can think and outthink many of us. And so then people are saying, well, what is the consequence of that? Do we need to
Yeah,
worry? Are there enough safeguards? That's a relatively new thing. In the early
yeah,
days, just establishing that it was useful at all was a big challenge.
yeah. Why do you think people are worried? Of course, there's the security and that could happen if it's going to harm people. And what are the reasons why people are worrying about AI today and so overwhelmed?
Well, I think there's a range. I kind of break it into short-term concerns and longer-term concerns. So in the short term, there's a lot of folks that are worried about job loss. Here are these intelligent agents and they're so good at coding. There's some concern. It used to be learning how to program was job security. I mean, if you went to college and learned that, for sure you could get a job. Now, if you're a junior programmer and you don't have much experience, even though you've taken all these classes, AI systems like Claude or OpenAI's Codex out of the box can sort of program circles around you. And so, and a lot cheaper, right? For pennies an hour instead of $30 or $50 an hour. There's a lot of concern about job loss, and that can be then extended to many different areas, accounting and legal, paralegals, all the junior entry level positions that people thought were required professional education. It turns out that AI agents and AI systems can do those quite well and a lot cheaper than humans. So there's those kinds of concerns. There's also concerns about bias. Let's say you were to train an AI model and you want it to be a legal assistant. And so a very natural thing might be, hey, let's take the last 150 years of court cases and we'll just use that data to train this model. Of course, you want it to be trained on legal cases that are real. But when you do that and the model's all trained and ready to opine on various legal matters, it starts saying very racist things, let's say. Well, it turns out, back in the 1800s and early 1900s, there was a lot of racism and even in the courts. And so that's in the documents, it's in the decisions. And if you're not aware of that, you introduce bias into these models so that they are saying things and they have a value system that is not what you intended. So there's those kinds of concerns. And all of these are very valid and legitimate, and I think need to be addressed. They're not what I worry about per se, because I'm confident that humans have shown time and time again the ability to overcome these sorts of things and figure out the right safeguards and proper ways to do training and so forth. I'm more worried about sort of the existential risks, which
Mm.
would be an AI becomes smarter than all of us. It starts self-improving. It sets its own goals. It has autonomy. And now we're kind of at the mercy of, does it want the same things that humans want? And that's why the focus of the work that I do always comes back down to values, because I think it's very important that the way we design these systems, we maximize the chances that whatever intelligent systems sort of are produced, that they share values with humans and they have the same values that humans have. Positive human values is very, very important, because I sort of believe, and not everyone agrees with me, but I think it's kind of a foreground conclusion in my own mind that they will be smarter than us. They're sort of like a child that's going to grow up and become way smarter than its parents. And we need to do a good job of raising it right during this
Yeah.
window where we are still the ones in control.
Yeah, currently it's kind of like it's an infancy or toddler stage, right? And we've got to raise it right and nurture it and make sure that it's doing what humanity wants it to do in a good way.
Yes.
There's a lot of terms like AGI and superintelligence. And for someone listening to this episode or that doesn't understand any of that, could you simplify for us what that is and how is that going to change and things for our humanity? What is it going to do for humanity?
Sure. Maybe it's helpful to kind of have an overview of the field, because these various terms
Mm,
are sort of often stepping stones in the process of evolving smarter and smarter AI. From 1956 to, let's say, 1985, we'll call that the age of symbolic AI. And generally, these were systems where you programmed the rules into the computer, and the computers were only good at solving very narrow problems. Maybe they could play checkers or chess, or they could prove theorems from a single textbook. But if you ask them, what color is the sky or how do I tie my shoe, they were completely baffled, right? A 5-year-old child was way smarter than these systems, but they were very good in a very small area, very narrow area. So that was kind of symbolic AI, and the systems were necessarily very narrow. Then from the 80s until, let's say, 2022, which was the release of ChatGPT around Thanksgiving in the United States, that was kind of the rise of machine learning. That was when these neural network approaches took off. The computing power had gotten to the point where it was actually feasible to just, with some good algorithms, feed a lot of data into the computer and it would teach itself. But you still had pretty narrow systems. So now you had computers that could play chess better than the world champion. They could fold proteins much better than the best scientists, but it was still specific areas. It was a real struggle to get them to drive a car, because driving a car has so many variables. Even though it's a narrow task, just driving the car, there's so many things that can happen. That's why self-driving took so long, and we're not quite there, but we're getting close. So that was kind of the era of narrow AI getting a little bit broader and powered by machine learning as opposed to programming and rules. Then what's happened from 2002, and now the timelines, the time between dates gets shorter because AI is moving so fast. From 2002 to 2005, it was sort of the beginning and the development of agentic AI. And agentic AI is just AI systems that can act independently as an agent to the degree that you let them. So you take actions on my behalf. Don't just answer questions, but go out and do things and then come back with some answers. And part of agentic AI required adding reasoning. So those systems all the way up until from the 80s until 2022, they were kind of like the genius kid in school who memorized everything, memorized all the answers in the textbook. So if you ask them a question, it could spit back the correct answer, but it didn't really reason its way through. There became a point, which kind of happened pretty quickly, where people realized, wow, we can only get so far with that. We're going to have to add reasoning back in. And fortunately, all the mechanisms for doing that had been pioneered from 56 until 80. So they began going back to the old stuff and taking the ideas for building reasoning systems. And they had this ability to have this fantastic memory and memorize everything, plus now reason on top of it. That enabled you to have AI agents. And that was the big thing. I remember going to conferences in 2024 even, and I'd say to these CEOs of these various AI startups, and they'd have a little breakout session and we talked for a while, and I'd say, have you thought about AI agents? And they said, well, that's a good idea. And yeah, no, we should put that on the list. Haven't really done much. And just a year later, the entire conference would be dominated by people building AI agent systems. So it happened really fast. And then, of course, it's taken off now. You have the CEO of NVIDIA and many different open source programs powering AI agents, OpenClaw, and all of the big tech companies, tech labs have embraced it. So now we're into the era of agentic AI. That's kind of where we are right now. The next step, my view of the next step, and you're beginning to see it already, is instead of having a single agent that goes out and does your bidding, you have groups of agents that work together. So that already exists, Claude Cowork and so forth. But then personalization of the agents and kind of an architecture that allows lots of people's agents to work together. Anthony's agents work with Craig's agents, work with somebody else's agents. And when you have that, now you're getting into sort of the next era that I think is happening very quickly. As we speak, it's happening, which is the collective intelligence, which is my specialty of AI agents. And that, I think, is probably one of the ways that we get to artificial general intelligence. So we had narrow intelligence, good at a specific domain, just playing chess, just folding proteins. General intelligence does anything that a human can do. And the definition of artificial general intelligence varies, but sort of a widely accepted one is when you have a system that can do anything humans can do, as well as the average human. Some people argue we already have those systems. Other people, like the head of Google, has said, well, he thinks by 2030, plus or minus a year, for sure, everybody will agree that we have these systems. So it's coming really quickly. And then it's just a very short time, in my view, until you have general superintelligence. And all superintelligence means is that it's smarter than humans. It's not as good as the average human, but it's smarter than the best human. And if you have artificial general intelligence that can do lots of tasks, now if you can reach that next level, you can do lots of tasks that humans can do, but you can do all of those tasks better than the best human. And that's kind of where we're going. That's what people refer to when they say superintelligence. In some ways, we have already achieved superintelligence in narrow areas because already AI plays chess better than any human, better than Magnus Carlsen, better than Garry Kasparov, better than the very best humans, not by a little bit, but by a huge amount. And the same with folding proteins and certain things, better than the best research scientists there. But in general tasks, we have not achieved that yet. And that's coming very soon. And then that's when all the safety issues come because you say, wow, it can do anything that any human can do, way better than the humans. And it can improve itself, which is called recursive self-improvement. Now we better make sure that it has our best interests at heart. And the time to ask that question is not after it happens, but right now when we're developing those systems.
Thank you for that explanation. That makes a lot of sense now. And I'm sure people listening to this will go, okay, that makes sense. Now, just a very quick question before we move on to the next section was, how did you learn from the perspective of working with people like Herbert Simon on the way of how you solve problems today?
Yes, my PhD was actually on creative problem solving. There's lots of areas of cognition. So in cognitive psychology, which is the study of how humans think, if you think about human thinking, you have perception or how we see things, how we recognize things, how we hear things. You have memory, which is a big part of thinking. You have attention. Where does the attention go? You're at a cocktail party and you're talking to somebody and then you hear your name from the other side of the room, even though there's all this noise going on. How does your attention hear that, right? That's called the cocktail party effect. That's a example of human attention in action. And then you have problem solving, which involves all those things. You have to perceive things. Attention has to be switched back and forth. You have to use your memory, short-term memory, long-term memory, all these things. So you can think of those as like the building blocks for understanding how human brains work. And those same things can be applied to any intelligent system. And that would be the difference between cognitive psychology, which is concerned with how humans think, and cognitive science, which is concerned about how any intelligent organism or entity thinks. And that could be a computer as well as a human. So cognitive psychology is kind of like contained within cognitive science. Herb Simon was interested in all of these things. Brilliant man, probably the smartest person I've ever met, quite frankly. And he and Alan Newell developed in the 1970s a theory of human problem solving. And they wrote a book is about this thick, a very thick book, a big paperweight of a book, and very dense. And yet it sort of put down everything that they had figured out about human problem solving. And the book was called Human Problem Solving, 1972. And so that was something that I studied quite a lot working with Herb. And I realized that in that book, he had kind of come up with a framework that works not only for humans, but also for any intelligent entity. It can work for AI as well. And so all these reasoning systems, they can use the same theory that Alan Newell and Herbert Simon came up with, and humans can too. If you built an architecture based on this kind of Nobel Prize winning theory, right, from these brilliant men back in the day, that architecture could allow AI agents to talk to each other, but it could also allow them to talk with humans and not just talk, but to solve problems in a very rigorous way so that the same goals, you could keep track of all the goals, you could keep track of what state you're in during problem solving and so forth. So it became kind of a universal architecture for cognition. And in fact, Alan Newell realized this before me, a brilliant man, and devoted most of the later part of his life essentially to trying to communicate and do research on unified theories of cognition. And he came up with one called SOAR that was based on that theory of human problem solving, and others came up with it, different variants of that as well. So that's what I learned from Herb. Many, many things. He was a brilliant man. We'd have great conversations. We talk about global warming when nobody knew what global warming was, but he had just come back from the National Academy of Sciences and, hey, there's this interesting presentation on global warming and we're trying to sift through the data. And it's like, oh, what's that about? He just loved science and I love science. And so we had great
Mm,
conversations, but he was particularly good at problem solving and psychology and cognitive science.
awesome. Thank you. Most people hear about AI alignment and they think it sounds like something technical, like a rule book or a constitution written by engineers. But you argue that this approach is actually quite risky. So, why is a fixed constitution the wrong way to build this technology?
There's something called constitutional AI, which is an approach to trying to get AI to behave in a good way. And it's a reasonable approach and it's praiseworthy. It came out of the folks from Anthropic, who obviously are very smart and also very concerned about AI safety. So I give them a lot of credit for being very responsible and concerned about the right things. The idea of constitutional AI is that you can write sort of a set of rules of what's right and what's wrong and what's ethical and what's not ethical. And this serves as kind of a constitution for the AI. And so whenever it's in doubt, it can refer back to that. And this is a reasonable idea, but the problem, it has a few problems, more than one. One of the problems that I have with it is that who gets to decide what's right and what's wrong? I mean, these AIs are going to be used by 8.3 billion people. And even if they're very well intentioned, which they are, it doesn't seem right that a small group of programmers at Anthropic gets to write the Constitution for everybody. So that's one problem I have. Another problem I have is that if you can write it in one place and stick it in the model, it's very easy to change it. Who's to stop militaries or other people from just saying, oh, okay, we're going to change the Constitution. They'll just change a few lines and now it's okay. The AI will go out and kill people or whatever, right? And so it's susceptible, too easy to change, and not representative enough are two of the problems I have with it. But the general idea of trying to have AI aligned with human values and taking seriously the fact that it's possible they may not be, that's very, very good. And Anthropic deserves a lot of credit for that.
Whether there's a right or wrong, but what is the best approach for this?
Well, I have my favorite approach, which is really based on human democracy. So when I think of the future for AI, what seems very clear to me is we're moving towards a world in which you have not just millions of individual personalized AIs working together, but billions and billions of them. And how can you possibly control all these? I mean, it seems like that's really not possible. And certainly the idea that a little constitution, one page or a few page document that's stuck somewhere is going to guide all of their behavior, that doesn't seem very realistic. And the idea that the AIs that are developed in China and in India and in Australia and in Europe are going to have the same values as the AIs that were developed in Silicon Valley with a sort of an American Silicon Valley slant, that also doesn't seem very realistic. So how can we solve this problem? And I spent a lot of time thinking about it. And it kind of dawned on me that humans have kind of already solved it. We haven't solved it perfectly. In fact, it's a really big, messy problem for humans, but we do have a means. In human society, many of the countries in the world today are democracies. By having a democracy, you have many different intelligent agents, in this case, humans, that have a vote, and everybody can have their own opinion. And my opinion may not be the same, Anthony, as yours. We may be in conflict, but we have ways of resolving it. We can vote if we can't figure it out any other way. We can negotiate. We can do conflict resolution. And in fact, it's probably a good thing that my values are different than yours, because it means it gives us a broader view of what human values are. And so the world that I imagine is billions of AI agents, but each one is personalized to the values of a different human, and reflecting the local culture, reflecting the individual values of that human. But there's an architecture that links them all together that enables them to resolve conflicts in the same messy way that humans resolve conflicts. And this becomes especially important because right now, humans can still outthink the AIs, and we can sort of press the off switch if we need to. But if you just go forward a few years, and we can talk about this later if you like, the rate of increase of AI's intelligence is off the charts. It's like nothing ever seen in any technological development ever, really, really fast. And so that means that these AI agents are thinking faster and faster. And there will come a time relatively soon, in my lifetime, in your lifetime, for sure, when humans' speed of thought is kind of like the speed of thought of a tree. Like if you go to a forest and you look at a tree and you talk to the tree doesn't respond. It just sits there, right? And you can run around the tree and you can go back and forth and all that. You can do all these things, and the tree is growing very, very slowly. It may be processing information, but it's at a very, very slow pace. Humans will be the tree. We're going to be moving at that speed, and AIs will be living, 1,000 human lifetimes in the blink of a human eye. And so you can imagine that humans cannot be the safeguard, right? In 1,000 human lifetimes, you can do a lot of things. It's going to be required that other AIs become the safeguard to make sure that there's not bad actors, which there for sure will be, but that those bad actors don't sort of take control and do things that are bad for humans. And so how does that work? Well, you have to have lots of them with lots of values serving as checks and balances on each other, kind of as happens in a democracy. We have lots of checks and balances in a democracy. So that's kind of the general idea, is that this is a way to be much more representative. You include everybody's values, so that's a good thing. And also you have checks and balances. And will it be perfect? No, but there will be a very messy negotiation process, just as there are with humans. And that hopefully will bring the risks way down. Because right now, even though it's most likely that AI is the best thing ever, there's still too high of a risk that it sort of really wipes us out. And so we got to just deal with that risk quickly before these systems become too intelligent.
Is there governance around this? Is people actually dealing with this right now? Or is it just like everyone's just doing what they want to do?
No, I mean, lots of people are worried about this. So that's good. Jeff Hinton is one of the champions. So, as I mentioned, godfather of machine learning, often referred to. And he used to work at Google. He actually quit Google in order to speak his mind without any conflicts of interest. Although I think he acknowledges Google is trying to be responsible as well. So he is basically going around to conferences and news outlets and everything and saying, hey, I got a Nobel Prize, a Turing Award, and I invented this stuff. So I know what I'm talking about. And I'm telling you, this thing is something we have to think about now. It's like he uses a number of different analogies. One of them that I like is, if you knew an alien intelligence that was much smarter than you was, 5 years away from Earth and heading towards you quickly, you wouldn't wait till they get here. You'd start sort of taking preparation. So he says that. He also says, AI is sort of like our children, which you mentioned earlier, which I think is great. I agree with that as well. These children are going to grow up and they're going to be smarter than their parents. So what can we do now while we're raising, the children and setting the rules and helping them develop their value system to make sure that everything comes out well? So people are worried about it. People are talking about it. There's also a lot of work going on in the regulatory space. I think Europe is sort of leading the US in this area. But even though I applaud that work and think it's good and valuable, in the long run, I don't think regulation can keep pace with how quickly things are evolving. So my own bias is that the systems have to be designed appropriately.
Mm.
If you design them right, kind of like if you raise the child right, then no matter how smart the child becomes, it had a good upbringing, that's your best bet and first line of defense. Trying to put rules on the child later when it's way smarter than you, that's second best. Maybe it's needed, but I wouldn't rely on that as your first line of defense.
It's interesting though, because now that you've got the ability to create anything you want with AI, right? And I've been creating things. I just came from a networking group where this gentleman was talking about people are using AI for harm. How do we police that? How do we regulate that? How do we make sure that there's some sort of governance around that?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I'm hoping that there will be international cooperation. Obviously, AI is already being used for military applications. There's intelligent drones, right, that are using AI to help them target, enemies. This was several years ago, a presentation at the Royal Aeronautical Society, and there was a U.S. Air Force colonel who was presenting, and he was describing an AI system that the U.S. Air Force had been experimenting with. Now, he said this is not live, this was a simulation, but in the simulation, AI was flying the airplanes, and it got more points for every target it destroyed. And so it wanted to destroy both friendly targets as well as the enemy targets. And when the operator said, no, you can't do that, it was smart enough to figure out, you could argue if it was smart or not, but it figured out that it could get more points if it destroyed the operator. So it destroyed the operator so it could get more points, blowing up every target. And then when it was prohibited from doing that, and it said, okay, you're not allowed to destroy the operator, that's not okay. It figured out it could destroy the communications tower so the operator could not rein it in. So already in simulations, you can see that if you're not really careful about the goals that you give these systems, they can behave in unpredictable ways and ways that maybe you did not intend. And in this case, that actually results in sort of destruction of yourself instead of the enemy. It really is a little bit scary. I think international cooperation and standards, and I know that's happening. I've been to various conferences where I've seen people from all over the world that are concerned about this and are trying to collaborate. It's in the interest of all humans to get this right. So that's on
Yeah.
our side, I think.
Wow, that's scary. What happens to a business if they build on top of an AI that has a fixed, rigid value system that they didn't choose?
All of the AI models, or most of the AI models that businesses would use, right, from the frontier labs, whether you're using Claude or GPT or Gemini or some other model or an open source model, they've all been trained on some degree of ethics and values. And so they have something as a default state. And usually it's probably pretty good. I think all those labs are very careful about how they do that, but it's certainly not perfect. And so my advice to any business is you need to make sure that it has your corporate principles embodied in the model. And you can do that by explicitly training the model and prompting the model to say, these are the things that my company values. We always treat the customer right. We don't do any shady business practices, whatever it is, as specific as you can. You try to be as specific as you can to sort of put not only the principles, but specific examples of what constitutes good and ethical behavior that is the way that you want your business to be represented. It's as if you had a new employee who kind of was willing to do anything because didn't know any better. And you had to explain, this is how we do business. We've been running business for a while. It's our reputation. This is what we care about. This is how we expect you to behave. And the good news is that these AIs are fairly malleable and they will adopt that, but you need to remember to give them that. And some of the listeners may have used like Soul MD files, which I think is with Claude. So there's different files, kind of like the Constitution, which I've already said it has its flaws, but at least it's a starting point where you could put in your principles and it remembers that from interaction to interaction. It kind of refers to those as its core truth. I think it's better if you can get those principles, distribute it throughout the system. And the way to do that is to give lots of examples, real world examples of what the AI should do in this case with a customer, or this case with a competitor, or this case with an investor. And the more of those specific cases you have, where part of what you're teaching the AI is not only the practical elements of what to do, but the values and ethical elements of why we're doing it, and why we do it this way. Even that other way maybe makes us more money, but we don't do business that way. You have to have lots of examples like that, so that there's not like one place that it could be accidentally or intentionally overwritten.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's important. Any of the work that I've been doing in the AI space, I always make sure that I do that as well. Now, you talk about collective intelligence, where the AI learns from the people it actually serves. So, can you explain for us, please, how that works in the real world business setting?
Sure. The idea of collective intelligence, kind of in its simple form, is the old saying, two heads are better than one. If you have a group, sometimes you get groupthink and bad results, but many times you get sort of better results because you're able to access more ways of thinking about the problem and so forth. And so I've spent most of my career in industry building collective intelligence systems. At first, they were made up of intelligent entities that were really just humans. So, for example, Predict Wall Street, that was a company I ran for 14 years. I founded the company, I ran it, and then I sold it. But what it did was it got thinking from millions of average everyday retail investors about the stock market by combining the thoughts of millions of people these opinions were coming in 24/7. We got billions of inputs from millions of people, but by combining them in the right way, we were able to make trading decisions in the stock market that sort of beat most of the pros on Wall Street. So that was the power. And I did it not because I came from Wall Street. I actually knew nothing about stock trading when I started this company. I know quite a bit more now, having run it for a while, but I did it because we tried to find a problem that was very, very difficult. And getting an edge on Wall Street is really, really hard. It attracts the best of the best, and there's a lot of money and data advantages and everything else that you're competing against. And so if you could have just everyday people, but enough of them putting their intelligence together in the right way, and if that architecture could beat the best guys on Wall Street, then you've really proven the power of collective intelligence. And so that's what I did. It took me 14 years to sort of prove it to myself, really, in that difficult domain. And it ultimately powered a hedge fund in 2018 that ranked in the top 10 of market neutral, which is a certain class of funds that sort of are hedged, basically portfolios that are hedged. So I convinced myself, and I think the rest of the team was convinced that, hey, this collective intelligence stuff really works. And then what we're doing now is basically applying it to AI agents. So in the past, the only intelligent entities really that existed were humans. But now we have humans and AIs. They're both intelligent entities. And so you can use that same general approach to say, hey, let's hook up the intelligence of millions of humans, but also millions or maybe billions of AIs as well. And
Mm,
if they have a common way of working together, which goes all the way back to Herb Simon and Alan Newell with their human problem solving and that big fat book that sort of says how to do it. If you use some things from cognitive science to help you build that architecture, and you use the idea of collective intelligence, you can get to a level of intelligence that is smarter than any of the individuals themselves. And that's one path to get to super intelligence, which is really what I'm focused on. And the reason I like that path is it's inherently democratic. It's inherently decentralized. It's inherently gives the opportunity to have everybody's values pulled into the system.
yeah.
So there's different ways to architect superintelligence. That's not the only way. The way a lot of people are doing it is, let's just train a bigger and bigger black box. You don't know how it works. It's unpredictable. And we cross our fingers that it does the right thing at the end. And that really scares me. Whereas a collective intelligence approach seems much safer. For one thing, every time each of the entities in your group takes an action, you can see what that action is. You can say, is that an ethical action? Are they going down the right path? You have this level of transparency that you don't have with the big monolithic systems. That's why I say how you design these systems really matters a lot, and is maybe even more powerful than regulation or other things in terms of not only creating safer systems, but also more powerful and more profitable systems. You don't have to oppose safety to profits, which a lot of people think you have to choose one or the other. I don't think that works, first of all, because if you have to choose, I hate to tell you, but safety is not going to win. There's too many forces
Mm.
competitive forces. So you have to find a way to design these systems that are both more profitable and also safer. And I think the collective intelligence paradigm, the democratic AI paradigm, is one way that does that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's keeping that sort of human feedback into the loop and actually making AI more profitable for your company, right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
And humans still, at this stage anyway, we still have knowledge and information and values that the AIs don't have. And so a company is much better off including the humans with a bunch of AIs working together than they are just sort of turning it over to AI. So I'm actually fairly optimistic. Recently, I've been thinking about the job loss question a lot because that seems to come up. So many people are worried about job loss. And if you think about it from first principles and you say, what is the limited resource? Human attention is the limited resource. Humans are limited. There's only so many humans and they only have so much attention. And so, yes, you can have AIs that might be way smarter than humans in certain areas, but humans are still going to be good at certain things, most importantly, good at providing the values. And there's a finite number of them, and it's really hard to train them up. I mean, it takes 20 years to get a human through the educational process. An AI, you press a button, you made another one. So there's always going to be a demand, I think, for humans. And I think even though there's going to be short-term dislocations and there's going to be a lot of change and people will be upset, I think in the long run, it's very bright for humans because if I was a smart super intelligence and I realized that humans were a limited resource, I would want to cherish that resource and I would want to include it and nurture it as much as I can because it's easy to make another AI, but it's really hard to make another human.
Yeah.
So that's what I hope will
Yeah.
be recognized more and more as we go down this path.
Yeah. As you were saying that, I was thinking like, humans doing a task or doing a job, they have a limited amount of time during the day within that 24-hour cycle. And if you're spending time actually monitoring, like not necessarily losing your job, but maybe repurposing your job for a different, in the sense that you become a manager of the AI and you program it and you give it the right information. Then while you're sleeping for 8 or 9 hours of the day, of the night, the AI is going and doing that work. You come back the next morning and you're evolving it and making it better and better and better. That's the way
Yes,
I see it.
I think
Yeah,
that's absolutely right. And it's kind of, for the business audience, if you think about a CEO, right? A CEO has limited attention. The poor CEO has to sleep and exercise and spend a little time with their family and
family.
if they want to sort of sustain their role, all those things. And so there's limited time of the CEO. And yet some of these CEOs are running companies that have 100,000, 200,000 people. How do they do it? And those people are all over the world. So they obviously can't be involved in every decision. Their time is very precious, right? They have to be very good at allocating their time and delegating and getting the employees that work for them to do the right thing and then checking back and so forth. And I think that's kind of the role that all of us are going to be. Every human is going to become much more like a CEO in the future. Even the entry level person out of college is going to quickly develop into a CEO where there's many AI agents doing the work while they're sleeping and so forth.
Yeah, and even the CEO has a clone, kind of like a AI clone of themselves that they can have a knowledge base, a second brain, where they can have all that information. So people asking questions, which means that it releases them, it actually gives them more brain space, more energy, more time to be able to do the things that they actually enjoy and love to do, and spend time on themselves rather than actually doing the task. Because the industrial age has made us into human robots, effectively, right? We're just doing tasks. And then if every other person or employee in the business also had a series of agents or AI, then they're able to get their work done probably a lot quicker, but also they can do more as well. So a lot of companies will, like I remember when I was in this transport agency, I said to one of the teams in the data analytics group that I worked in, I said, why aren't you guys doing research and development, R&D, and providing thought leadership to the business? You're actually waiting for the business to come to you, tell you what they want, but they don't know what they want because they don't understand your technology. Whereas if you spend more time doing R&D and understanding what their problems were, and then providing thought leadership around that, then that would actually also help them move forward. And they weren't interested in that. Oh, we just don't have enough time. If you get AI doing all this research for you, then you can actually have more information that you can then provide the business and guide them on the journey because, they're not technical. And my job was the conduit between the business and the technical team. So I was kind of like translating business speak into technical. See a lot of positives around how AI is going to be able to help businesses.
I think you're just very quickly, I think you're right about that. If this plays out and if AI is used properly, it will free up your time instead of putting you on a faster hamster wheel. And humans will be doing those things that are very, very essential. And I think it becomes less and less of sort of, the routine thinking and cognitive tasks and much more of the values and the vision and where are
Yeah.
we trying to go and what's important to us. It's
Yeah.
really just providing that guidance. And then you can play golf or listen to music or do more of what it is that charges you
Yeah.
up, knowing that you have an army of these very competent sort of artificial intelligences that are actually executing your vision. That's the way it should be. And hopefully if people design it right and they approach it in the right way, that's how it will be.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a business owner that I was talking to a couple of weeks ago. I was doing this clarity assessment session for AI with him. And he said, "Well, what tool should I use?" And I said, "Well, let's not start the conversation with that. Let's discuss who you are, what your business is, what your vision is, what your outcomes that you're looking for, and where are you being a bottleneck in your business." And that was a different conversation that we had. And I was able to then also provide information and recommendations and say, well, you've got a technology stack at your disposal, but you may not be using the full capability of it. It's not about just throwing AI at any problem because whatever sits underneath is going to get amplified. So if your data is not structured properly, if your processes are made up of workarounds and band-aids, then guess what's going to happen when you automate it and put AI over the top of it? It's going to get
Yes.
clunky. It's a paradigm shift for people and business owners that I'm finding working with
Yes.
them.
Well,
Yeah,
that's a great question that you started with, I think.
yeah, exactly. Does this mean that AI evolves differently depending on who's using it?
Your personal AI definitely will evolve differently depending on who's using it. So if AI is learning from humans, then depending on who the humans are, they're giving it different feedback and different guidance. And, AI systems are getting better and better at learning and incorporating that feedback and guidance. And so, absolutely, you can start with two off the shelf AIs. And if they interact with different humans who guide them in different ways and give them different prompts and tell them to remember different things, a month later, you could have very different capabilities. So, absolutely, humans can have a huge impact, not only the values and the ethics of the AI, but also its competency and its ability to perform good work.
Absolutely. You talked about the financial markets and the predict Wall Street and the collective approach. How did you handle the pressure of having to rely on the kind of intelligence?
So for me, it was easy because the whole company was based on this idea of collective intelligence and this new approach. So I had many people at the time that I started the company. I think we did the preliminary work around 2000, and then we got venture backing in 2006. And the venture capitalists that came in, they understood very well what they were betting on, that this was a brand new approach. We were going to use collective intelligence. We were going to have inputs from millions of people. And, it was a gamble and a risk as to whether that would actually, be able to perform well in financial markets. A lot of people said, they tended not to be the investors, but other people who were experienced said, what do retail investors know? I mean, this is never going to work. If you have a bunch of people who don't know much and you just put them together, you're going to get, a whole lot of people who don't know much and you have no chance. But it turned out that actually it did work because a lot of the secret sauce is how do you hook the people together? And you can detect patterns. Even sometimes when people overreact to something, that information can be valuable as well. So there was just a lot of information in the collective minds of millions of investors that wasn't already in the market. And if you properly harness that, you were able to get an edge. And so it ended up working. We learned a lot in the process, but I never really had anxiety about, I mean, I believed that it would work and I didn't have anxiety or pressure that we're doing a crazy thing because I mean, the thing either worked or didn't. The whole company was based on the idea.
That's great. It's good to hear. Now, for founders or leaders listening who are trying to implement AI right now, how do they move past the hype and actually start building systems that people can trust?
So I think the very best thing, my standard advice on this is to play with the systems. Just pick a task. It doesn't really matter what it is. Pick a task that's important to you. It should be something that you care about, and ideally something that you know a lot about already. Something that you do that takes a lot of your time where you have a lot of expertise. And just start playing with these systems that come from the frontier labs that you can get out of the box, whether it's Claude or GPT or Gemini or Mistral or Llama or DeepSeek, whichever one you want. It tends to be the ones from the frontier companies are the easiest to use because you can just go to a website and, pay a subscription and you're off to the races. And just start trying to delegate and get it to do pieces of the tasks that you normally do. And because you have a lot of domain knowledge about that task, it will be very readily apparent to you when it's doing really well and when it's making mistakes. If you pick a task that you don't know much about, I think it's going to be difficult. So it's kind of the same as if you were to train an apprentice or you had an entry level employee and something was consuming a lot of your time. You always do better sort of training up the employee in a job that you already know how to do well. But if you can get this employee to do it, then it's going to free up a lot of your time. I think you should approach AI in the same way on an individual level. And there's no substitute for just getting your hands dirty. It's a lot of fun. I think most people will be surprised at how much they can do. And once you have some working knowledge that way, you can take that same principle and sort of zoom out to the company level or the organization level and say, okay, what are the areas that we really wish we had more resources that we could apply to this particular part of the organization. Let me try to get the managers and the people involved in that to adopt AI and to try it out in areas that they know and see what they do. So I think that's the starting point. And then there's, of course, many consultants that are very good, like yourself, that have specific expertise and can help people think through these things. But I
Yeah,
think step one for somebody who just is brand new to it is start playing with it.
yeah,
It's not
ab-
really intimidating once you get your hands in there.
absolutely. And that's something that I did. I mean, I initially, when ChatGPT came out, I started using it back in 2022, I think it was, and it started to learn everything about me and my business and my brands. And what I did over the last 2.5 years with this podcast and you've been through this process where got sent to a page, you filled out a form, you booked your call, and then you appeared here. But in the back end, I've got something like 60 guests in motion in my pipeline, right? Now, how do I manage that one by one by one through email? So what I ended up doing is using a lovable AI and learned how to not just vibe code, but to actually come up with a good strategy around it. And so my way of doing it was ChatGPT became my ideation partner and Lovable became my build implementation and build partner. So what I ended up building is a guesting system that when guests come in, I can see exactly what the information is. I can move it to the next stage, and I can keep a track of where everyone's at instead of having to go through emails, which is what I was doing before. But then I decided to systemize, and as James Clear says, you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. So that's the approach I've taken, is to systemize as much as I can so that I'm taking that work away from me. It's having automatically happening, and I can do more things and think about more ideas about what I want to do. So absolutely. And then in 5 months, I've gone from zero to being recognized as a level 5 vibe coding certification. So, there you go. You just got to be consistent and keep going at it.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. That's a terrific story. I think that's absolutely right, what you've
Yeah.
done.
Yeah.
You are living proof of how the process works.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is when I'm having conversations with other guests who are also podcasters or creators and they're struggling, they're going, "Well, how can I get that?" And I'm like, well, I can help you build. So I'm actually helping other creators and podcasters now to build that for them. So yeah.
Wow.
Now, so what is the first step that an innovation leader should take to ensure that their AI isn't just smart, but it's also responsible?
Well, I think writing down your values and the principles, which a lot of people may have already for their companies because they have that as an exercise they did for themselves and also sort of a guiding philosophy or set of principles that they use for new employees that come on. I think taking that and training the AI up on that would probably be a good first step. And then, sort of, I guess, if we're talking about very pragmatic kinds of approaches, sort of look at your business process. This is less of my AI researcher brain and more of my entrepreneur brain speaking now. But yeah, look at your business process and look at the different steps and what are the critical processes. And probably there are areas that you know that if something went wrong in this particular area, it would be really bad. So you want to make sure that that is addressed and has safeguards and so forth around it first. So a lot of it, I guess the easiest way to think about it that might sort of relieve any anxiety that new adopters have for using AI systems is to think about these AI agents as new employees. You're used to dealing with new employees. You understand that they don't know everything about your business. You know that trainings needed. All those same things are going to be true of AI agents. They may be reasonably smart out of the box, but they don't know your business. Training will be needed. Correction will be needed. Monitoring will be needed. All the things that you would do with a new employee, just expect to do with these AI agents. And that's not a bad, first approximation of how to begin the process.
Yeah. And you can also do a download of your brain into knowledge base and then build an agent that can answer those questions for your employees. I had one of my clients who's a clinic owner on the podcast, and he said to me, because I built a chat agent for his website, for 3 of his websites, and he says, when I get new staff now, I don't need to train them because I just get them to go and talk to the chat agent, and it's got all the information. So all of that repetitive stuff that he was, talking about is now the agent is able to answer those questions. And so it's the same answer that the public will get. So then you're building consistency as well in your business, as well as what customers are experiencing from the front end as well. Yeah,
Right. You can train the trainer and you're training the AI to train the employees. And that is
yeah,
one advantage with AI systems is with a new employee, you can't press a button and upload all the papers and emails and everything that you've ever done into their brain all at once. That is something that
yeah,
human brains are not equipped for, but AI can do that. So that is the
exactly.
advantage.
Exactly. So how do you stop a democratic AI system from just following the loudest or most biased voices?
Well, it depends on the architecture. In the architecture that I would recommend, each participant has an equal voice. So it's kind of like one agent, one voice, and you have to make sure that some people are not allowed to have a million agents and somebody else just has one, right? So there's the same kind of issues you would have with stuffing the ballot box in an election. You can have those in voting systems. So that's one approach, I guess, for when it comes to voting. But I think there are going to be situations where companies that have more money and more resources conceivably could try to throw their weight around and have more weight in a democracy. I mean, it happens already in human democracies. If somebody has a huge amount of money, they can apply it with political action committees or they can lobby and they can do those things. So I think all of those same issues are going to arise in one form or another in a democratic AI architecture. And I think a starting place is to look at the way that we've resolved these issues in human democracies and sort of, port that over to the online, democracy. So that's probably where I would start. And places where it works, great. And places where it doesn't work because there's a technological difference, then you're going to have to address them. So I think there's going to be a lot of bumps in the road and a lot of issues no matter which path we go down in terms of deploying AI. But if we can kind of get the basic direction right, I think we reduce that existential risk way down. So to me, the basic direction, there's a couple key basic things. One is that we design the system for power and safety at the beginning rather than trying to tack safety on after the fact. So that's just the
Mm,
basic decision.
yeah,
Are we going to, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? Are we going to wait till the thing breaks and has catastrophic consequences? Or are we going to try to anticipate? So I think that's an important thing. Let's anticipate. And that means let's design it in such a way that sort of out of the box, it is as safe as it can be. And then I think that democracy is a pretty good, I mean, it's, people have said it's, the worst of all political systems except for all the other ones, right? And that's kind of it. I mean, it's very messy and it sure does give us, a lot of problems. And yet it somehow has survived at least for a couple of thousand years and seems to be a reasonable approach. When I look at sort of the amount of risk and damage that humans have done to each other, and you try to be scientific about it, it's something like less than 1/10 of 1% of the human population. sort of dies in wars and violent conflict each year. So that's horrible and tragic. Every death is bad, but 1/10 of 1% is pretty low compared to Jeff Hinton's and other people's estimates that the current risk is, 10 to 20% chance that all humanity goes extinct with AI. That's the current path we're on, 10 to 20%. I would take 1/10 of 1% any day of the week. And I think you can make a huge leap to get there simply by designing the systems to kind of be as good as humans have come up with. And in my mind, democracy is as good as humans have come up with. And so there's an analog for democratic AI that we can implement, but it has to be designed. You can't try to tack it on after the fact. You have to sort of go into it saying, okay, this is, we're going to have AI agents. That's already happening. Let's start thinking about how they work together, and let's make sure that the systems that they work together on are democratic or have elements of democracy in them.
Yeah, those are great points and great advice. Thank you, Craig. Okay, we talk about the champion mindset on this podcast a lot. I wonder, as AI becomes more integrated into our lives, how do we make sure that it's something that empowers our human potential rather than replacing it?
Yeah, I think every human sort of wrestles with, why am I here? What's my purpose? What does it mean, to live my best life and so forth. And I think in the ideal scenario, AI is empowering all of us to do that. But the thing about AI and computer science in general that every first year computer science student learns is this rule of garbage in, garbage out. It's called GIGO, but it also can stand for good things in, good things out. And, whatever you put into the system, I think you can expect that to be amplified and come out. And so if you want to have champion level performance, if you want to live your best life, then you have to pay a lot of attention to your actions and what you're putting into the system. And so in some ways, even though there's lots of technological challenges with regard to AI, to me, the biggest challenge is not really technological, but it's really a challenge to us, to each human, to sort of put our best foot forward, to live our best lives, to put our best values out there, because this is what's going to be amplified by our technology. And this has always been important, but it just got a lot more important, right? Because in the past, if you, made a misstep or did something wrong, there was a limited amount of damage that could result. Now the damage could be a lot better, a lot worse, but also the positive things could be a lot better if you put good inputs into the system. So that's kind of what I would emphasize is, the challenge of being a good human, living a good life has not diminished at all. If anything, the stakes have just gotten higher.
And what does it look like when a machine and a human are truly working in a champion partnership?
Somebody mentioned this. I thought it was a great analogy because popular movies, a lot of people relate to them. And it was the distinction between Terminator and Iron Man, right? Terminator was the AI goes crazy and kills us all. And Iron Man is everybody has an Iron Man suit where you can fly and you can do all these things. And I think that's what it looks like when AI is properly implemented. It turns everybody into sort of a super person. It amplifies your abilities, kind of like that Iron Man suit. And so that's what we want to aspire to. And we just want to take a few reasonable, not too difficult steps to sort of minimize the chances of things going down the Terminator path.
Okay, so we want to move away from Skynet and Terminator and move
Yes.
more towards the Marvel and the Iron Man,
Yes.
a superhero. Awesome. How do we keep our sense of purpose as these systems become more capable?
I think it becomes even more important to have that sense of purpose. I actually, human beings, you can think of humans in different ways. What makes me a human? And in the past, maybe people say, well, it's our thinking ability, it's our reasoning ability. And these are all important elements of being a human. But I think more and more as AI begins to be able to do those things, it's able to think, it's able to reason as well as us and then better than us, then what's left for the human? Actually, what's left for the human is the most important thing, which is the values and the purpose and the sense of we're doing reasoning, we're doing thinking, but in service of what? So this is a brilliant little thing that gives me a lot of hope. Going back to Herb Simon one more time, he wrote a little book, and I love little books. So he wrote that big paperweight of a book, but he also wrote a little book. And the little book was called Reason in Human Affairs. And in that book, he said, I'll paraphrase, reason can't tell us where to go. At best, it can tell us how to get there. And by that, he meant that no matter how smart you are or how smart an AI is, it can't tell you what's right and wrong. There's no logical way to derive values or to say this is right and this is wrong. And I reasoned it out because I can think a trillion times faster than you. It doesn't matter how fast an AI can think. It cannot come up with what's right and wrong. That has to come from somewhere else. And I think in the future, that has to come from humans. That's really our role, is to say, this is what's right, this is what's wrong, this is what's meaningful. And then the AIs ideally adopt that and they can execute on that much better than we can. The purpose of humans becomes really, really important. We are the source of those values for these incredible intelligences. And if we design the systems properly, I think we can definitely point them in the right direction.
100% agree with you there. Now, Craig, people have been listening to this episode and they are interested in learning more about what you're doing. I'm sure you said you've written a book, is that right?
I did write a book. It was on software quality. So that was in, I think, 1996. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's the best place for this, although I can distill that whole book down into an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's the field of software quality in a nutshell. And that's the reason I feel so strongly that design is important, because I really researched it when I was a younger man and found that that was it. But I have written a series of 10 white papers on superintelligence, and they're all available on superintelligence.com. There's also, dozens of videos. Some of them, a lot of them are only 3 minutes long or shorter. So people can just kind of snack on them if they want. And they cover everything from sort of the history of AI to AI safety principles, some of the things that we've been talking about. So it's all free. There's designs out there. If somebody's more technical and they want to sort of look at some designs, I encourage them to just take whatever's useful and then build from there. This is all free to the public. Really, my mission at this point is to try to make sure that, as many people as possible understand the importance of designing these systems to be safe and to take a design approach rather than a fix it later approach.
Yeah, 100%. We'll put those links into the show notes, but they'll be on your episode page on the Champion Mindset Collective hub. So you get a dedicated page with all your bio, your details, the article, the practical guide. So what happens is the video gets converted into an article then gets distilled down into a 3-page guide that people can download, and everything that we've talked about gets summarized in there. There's reflection points and there's practical steps that people can take as well. All the videos, everything will be on there as well. So we'll put that in the show notes. Um,
Fantastic.
yeah, so now we're at the quick fire round. So 6 quick questions. You can answer these in a single word or a short sentence. And the first question for you is, how do you define success, and has that definition evolved for you over time?
I think success is probably measured by how well do you feel like you're following your own heart. That's my short answer to that.
Yeah. Who's been your greatest inspiration and why?
Well, that's a tough one because there have been so many. So Herb Simon obviously was a big influence. He was a fantastic scientist, very curious and just brilliant. I've also had some terrific mentors in the business world. There's a gentleman named Howard Morgan, who's the chairman of B Capital Group, and he is just the ultimate person I've met who kind of combines living a good life, being a good person, and helping entrepreneurs. If you are ever fortunate enough to take investment from him, he's as good as they get. And then, I don't know, I've had a picture of Martin Luther King since my college days. It's on my wall right now because I always felt like that's what we should aspire to. So lots of good examples out there.
Yeah, this podcast is based on the foundation of Be the Change in the World That You Want to See by Mahatma Gandhi. So,
Perfect.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
another one. I love
exactly.
his
Yeah.
life and his example as well.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, last week I actually went onto my website and because it's built on AI, and I said, look, I want to have a carousel of quotes that I go through. So Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi, all those guys are on there. My favorite quotes are on there. And if people come up with other quotes that they like, please suggest them and I'll put them on there. Okay, what is something that you believe that others may disagree with?
Well, the first one that comes to mind is I believe that AI not only can be creative, but has been creative for quite a while. Whereas I still am surprised. I run into people, even this late in the game, who are like, oh, AI will never be creative. I think they're trying to hang on to something that humans can be that AI can't. And creativity is not one of those things. I studied creativity. I'm a big fan of human creativity, but I don't think it's unique. We are not the only cognitive system that can be creative, but I do think that we might be the only entity out there that can espouse human values and provide the values for AI. But creativity is something that a lot of people think AI cannot be, and I think that's wrong.
Yeah. I believe our purpose is to evolve, into the best versions of ourselves. And if that's using AI, then why not? But also, is to expand ourselves. Life is about expansion. It's about getting out of your comfort zone and learning more. I love what Rob Dial from the Mindset Mentor says. If you stay in your comfort zone, your dreams are going to die there. So get out of your comfort
I
zone.
love that. That's great.
Yeah. Another quote he says is that, do you want to do the hard stuff now and have an easier life later? Or do you want to have the easy stuff now and have a hard life later? So there you go. That's a decision that people can make. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think it would be, this was definitely me, but I think it may be a lot of young people, is don't be so concerned what other people think. I mean, if you believe something strongly and you feel it, especially if it's kind of your passion and it lights you up, then you should follow that. And don't worry too much about, others that maybe seem older and wiser, or maybe your peers are saying you should do XYZ. You should really try to find out what's in your own heart and follow that.
100%. What is one message that you'd like to share with the world?
I think, especially with regards to AI, that everybody makes a difference. Every interaction that we have online, every email we send, every text, every prompt, everything that we do that's visible is training AI, is shaping AI. And it's very, very important because relative to the number of AIs that there are going to be in the future, the number of humans is quite small. And so each of us matters quite a bit. And I found firsthand from Predict Wall Street, where we had just a bunch of regular average humans able to outperform the very best minds on Wall Street. It really, showed me the importance of everybody saw it. And if you ask those everyday humans, which we did, most of them said, I don't know what I'm saying. You sure you want me to give you your opinion? I mean, they kind of had a lot of self-doubt about their contribution. And yet in aggregate, those contributions were incredibly powerful and very, very valuable. So I think all of us have a responsibility, and we need to be aware that everything we're doing, we're setting an example, not only for other humans, but importantly for all the AIs out there.
Yeah. Last question for you is, what does it mean to you to be a champion and have a champion mindset?
I kind of am a big fan of this idea that, it's not so much about competing with other people, but competing with yourself and your own, vision and what you want to be. And so I kind of go back to, are you following your heart? Are you doing that which you know inside you're here to do? And if you are, and if you keep trying to do that better, even though there's setbacks, that's okay. But that's the path to go on. And that's what it is to be a true champion. Don't give up and be true to yourself.
Yeah. And also, don't compete with other people, but compete with yourself, as you said, and be a collaborator and co-create with other people.
Yes, absolutely.
Because if we go back to the beginning of this podcast, the people that you were talking about that you worked with, they were co-creating together. And that's the only reason we got to where we are today.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
All of our technology, AI itself, would not be here if humans had not collaborated. We'd probably still be back in caves, not very happy.
exactly. Awesome. Thank you, Craig. It's been a real eye-opener for me. What's really stuck with me is that the idea that we don't have to just accept AI as a finished product handed down to us, but it's actually something that we can shape to reflect who we are. It's about the collective wisdom and not just the cold logic. For a leader listening to this episode, really I think that the takeaway is clear. Trust is built through inclusion, not just instructions. Craig, thank you so much for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe and share this episode with someone who may benefit from this. You can find all the links to Craig's work in the show notes and on the episode page on the Champion Mindset Collective. Thanks for being part of this movement. And lastly, I just want to say you are loved, you are worthy, champion your life, champion your greatness, and have an amazing day.
Thank you, Anthony. This has been a lot of fun and you do a great job. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig.